What does it mean to simplify a radical that is not a perfect root? Well, first we need to discuss what a perfect root is so that we can distinguish between the two. A perfect root is a number that can be made by multiplying the same number times itself. A great example of this is 25. 25 can be made by multiplying 5 times 5. So if I take the square root of 25, the result of that operation is 5. So the inverse of taking a square root is squaring a number. If I square 5, in other words multiply it times itself, then I have 25. So you see, squaring a number and taking a square root are opposites of each other. So how can we use this idea to take the square root of a number or simplify a number that is not a perfect square? Let's take a look at a number that's not a perfect square and see how this works. So let's look at the square root of 96. 96 is not a perfect square, but I can find perfect squares that divide evenly into 96. I'm going to use my list of perfect powers that I have here. It's always handy to have this list with me when I'm doing problems like this, instead of trying to think of these perfect powers off the top of my head. So go to the perfect square list. I'm going to use the perfect square column instead of the cubes or fourths or fifths. The reason I'm using the perfect square column because I'm dealing with a square root. Alright, if I had a cube root or a fourth root or a fifth root, then I would use one of the other columns, but I'm using a square root, so I want a perfect square. Remember, squares are inverses of square roots. So what we want to find is the largest perfect square number that will divide evenly into 96. So we essentially just go down through the list and find the largest number that will divide evenly into 96. You can just get your calculator out and start dividing numbers into 96 one at a time if you cannot see which number will divide into 96. So I'm going to start. 1 will divide into 96, but that's not the largest number. 4 will divide into 96, so I'm going to make a mark by 4. I'm going to keep going though because I think there's probably a larger one in there. 9 will not divide into 96, so I'm going to mark through that one. 16 will go into 96, so I'm going to make a mark by that. 25 will not go into 96. 36 does not go into 96. 49 does not go into 96, and I don't really need to go any further because I've already gone over halfway through 96, so there's no point in going any further. So the largest number I found in my list of perfect squares is 16. So now I've found a perfect square that will divide evenly into 16, or into 96. So how many times does 16 go into 96? Well, let's just plug it into our calculator and see. 96 divided by 16 gives me 6. So that tells me that 16 times 6 gives me 96. Well, I need to break that up into square roots. So I need to rewrite square root of 96 using the numbers 16 and 6. So I write the square root of 16 times the square root of 6. And I do this so that I can actually take a square root. So now I'm going to take the square root, and by take a square root I mean perform the operation of square root. Performing an operation of square root is the same thing as performing the operation of multiplication or performing the operation of addition. So I'm going to take the square root that I can now take. I can take the square root of 16, which equals 4, because 4 times 4 is 16. Notice that the 16 is beside of the 4 in my chart. That is because 4 times 4 is 16. So the square root of 16 is 4. I cannot take a square root of 6. There is no perfect square of 6. So 6 is not a perfect square. There is no number that multiplied times itself will give me 6. So I leave that as square root 6. And there is no perfect square number that will divide evenly into 6. So that's as far as that will go. That is a simplified form of square root 96. So let's try another one. Let's try a perfect cube. Working with perfect cubes is essentially the same idea as working with perfect squares, only this time you're interested in finding a number that can be broken down into the same number times itself 3 times instead of 2. I'll show you an example. A great example of a perfect cube is the number 8. 8 can be made by multiplying 2 times itself 3 times. 2 times 2 times 2 gives us 8. We can also say 2 cubed. The inverse of 2 cubed is the cube root of 8, which equals 2. So when we want to take a cube root of a number, we're looking for a value multiplied times itself 3 times that equals that number. But just like with square roots, not all numbers are perfect cube roots. But we can simplify cube roots by taking out perfect cubes that are divisible into that number. So let's see how we do that. Let's use the cube root of 108 as an example. Just like before, we're going to use our list of perfect powers to find the largest perfect cube that will divide evenly into 108. So instead of using our square column, we're going to use our cube column this time, because we're interested in numbers that have been cubed. Let's look for the largest value that will divide evenly into 108. Again, grab your calculator and just start testing numbers if you would like. I look at this column and I see that 27 is a number that will go into 108. So I'm going to test a couple numbers larger than 27 and see if any of those will go into 108, and I find that none of them will. So 125 is larger, so don't even need to test that. 64 will not go in. So 27 is my largest number. So 27 times what gives me 108? Well, I can put that in my calculator. I can say 108 divided by 27 equals 4. So there are my two factors. That's what I need to use to simplify my cube root. So I need to write that as the cube root of 27 times the cube root of 4. Now I have a value of which I can take a cube root. 27 is a perfect cube. Because it's in my list of perfect cubes, 3 is the perfect cube of 27. 3 times 3 times 3 equals 27. So the cube root of 27 is 3. I can't take a cube root of 4, so I leave it as is. 3 cube root of 4. That is the simplified version of cube root of 108, and that's as far as I can go. You can apply this same principle to 4th roots, 5th roots, 6th roots, any root at all. You just find the largest perfect power that will divide evenly into the value that you're looking to simplify. And that's it.